This is stupid. This is stupid. This is stupid. She just kept saying that. Maybe a couple hundred of us are protesting on the sidewalk in front of the Museum of Modern Art. And Celia's all, oh, this is stupid. This is so stupid. Oh my God. A lot of them were wearing yellow sashes like suffragists. A lot of white and yellow clothes. I guess Celia and I hadn't read that part of the protest flyer. We were wearing our flip-up sunglasses and no-wave thrift, the usual. Trying to be as cool as Kim Gordon. Kind of stuck out in all that yellow. Some of these sashes said 91% male. This business guy in a business suit stopped in a really business way and asked a protester if we all wanted him to be 9% female. I think it was serious. There were banners. I like the one that said MoMA, Museum of Male Art. Another asked MoMA, do only white men make art? But the banners were all more in your face than any of the actual protesters. Everyone looked dreary, like we'd already lost. Celia, though, she didn't care who heard anymore. She was getting riled up, saying, this is stupid. Louder and louder. Just a total bitch, right? Made me a little nervous, but I was into it. I think. The first time we met, a year earlier, I watched her spray paint asshole across some asshole's painting. But she was used to guys being lame. She wanted more here. She wanted these women to get angry. We were all slumping up and down the block in the picket line like a bunch of zombies. Guys with briefcases zoomed by without even looking up at the signs. People trying to visit the museum just snuck in between us. I don't think we even cut down the museum's attendance that day. And Celia's all, this is stupid. One of these women stopped while propping a big picket sign up against her shoulder. The sign said MoMA doesn't know best. Cute, right? She'd heard Celia and she asked, what's with the attitude? Celia splayed out her palms and motioned at this crowd of just like bored women in front of the Museum of Modern Art. Like, really? Is this really all we're gonna do? A couple weeks before that protest, before summer really hit that year, we were in Soho to see Jean's show at the Mary Boone Gallery. Celia had already seen that show like a dozen times. Mary Boone was still down on West Broadway next to Castelli and Sonnabend. All of these galleries that Celia and I were just pawing to get our shit into. Celia kept saying how she was going to bring her slides into Mary Boone, like Boone would ever look at them. But Celia was a terror. I was afraid she'd do it and end up getting the cops called on her. I could see her banging on Boone's office door when the gallery girls wouldn't let her through. And she kept saying, what? What? When we stood in front of Jean's painting of a banana wearing Andy's white wig, she said, Jean is 24. He's only 5 years older than us and he's fucking huge right now. We always called him Jean like we were actually friends with him or something. It's just what we heard some very fabulous, in-the-know people call him. People who'd been to parties with him and Andy. We'd never even seen Jean in person. Or maybe we called him by his first name like he was a Renaissance master. Like Leonardo, Michelangelo, Jean-Michel. We'd moved on to his painting of a fire-breathing stick figure, and I said, Celia, you'd have better luck getting Boone to see your stuff if you spray-painted it on the walls outside like Jean did. Her eyes lit up like that was the first thing she'd do after we'd left. I was afraid I just created a monster. I had to rationalize with her here. When we left the gallery to see what was on at Castelli, I said, you know, Cece, we've been checking out what's at Mary Boone for a year now. How many women has she shown? She said, none. Like, immediately. She didn't even need to think about it. I didn't either. Could have asked the same thing for just about every gallery in Soho and gotten the same answer. I told her, I'd hate to break it to you, but I think you'll need to get a sex change before you get into Mary Boone. And she said, oh, I know. I'm molding a dick in the studio right now. I'll pull it out of my pants and pound it on her desk. We laughed, but I didn't know if she was serious. Before we walked into Castelli, she stopped at this light pole. There was a flyer taped to it. Tons of flyers, but this one stuck out. We've been seeing it all over Soho. Celia stopped and read the whole thing out loud. Museum of Modern Art opens, but not for women artists. Let MoMA know. Join a demonstration. June 14th at MoMA, 53rd Street entrance, 12 to 3 p.m. All women artists, friends, supporters, men, all come. Wear white and yellow if possible. Bring postcards of women's work. We will have banners, flags, and flowers. Women Artists Visibility Event. She tore the paper off the pole and said, "We're doing this, right?" I wasn't so sure. You know, I'd gone to the No Nukes protest a couple years earlier in Central Park. But that's when I was 17. I'd gone with my mom, for Christ's sake. I was a lot older by 84. I was 19. So I was kind of blasé about going to a Women Artists Visibility event. I mean, 500,000 people went to that No Nukes thing, and a couple years later, there's still nukes. So I didn't think some protest was gonna get our work into MoMA. They just reopened after some big deal renovation, and the first exhibition was supposed to be a survey of what was happening in art today. There were like a dozen women artists out of the 200 people they were showing. Of course, right? And Celia said, June 14th, and folded up the paper before stuffing it into my purse. Don't forget. I looked around. There were dozens of these flyers posted around Soho. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to forget. But 20 minutes into this protest, Celia just kept saying, "This is stupid. This is stupid. This is stupid." People would start chanting, "Count women's art! Count women's art! Count women's art!" But they weren't even yelling it. It was just this really dull monotone, like counting art was about as boring as it sounds. Or maybe they just didn't think they should get too loud. Then Celia stopped. We were mindlessly walking along with the picket line, but she stopped, and everyone behind us bumped into our backs and wrapped around us. I asked her, "What now?" She panned around the crowd once more, then looked straight at the museum's door. She said, "I'm going in." I'm like, "You're what?" "I'm going in." June 14th, 1984 was the day that Celia Merode decided to stop caring. To stop caring about having a future career with MoMA. She decided that the best way to stop caring was to prance inside the Museum of Modern Art on 53rd Street in Manhattan. Celia Merode strode past the front attendant without a ticket. She climbed 5 flights of stairs where she reached painting and sculpture through the 1940s. She looked like any other guest until she reached Matisse's Danse 1. The 5 figures in the Fauvist masterpiece are lightly holding hands, dancing in a circle with the light, uninhibited, and yes, nude. I followed Celia in and watched her just bolt right past the guy tearing tickets. I don't think he even noticed. No, I don't have the chutzpah to do that, to just not pay. So I waited in the lobby, but I could see Celia running up the staircase like she had a mission. Like she was Joan of Arc plowing through tourists with a shield. Celia Merode pushed off her maroon workman's boots without untying the laces, because this was the day she stopped caring. She pulled down her billowy gray pants and wrinkled them at her feet for the same reason. After she pulled her arms out of her unbuttoned blouse, the other visitors said it didn't appear to bother her in the least when she unclasped her bra. I snuck in with a school group like I was a chaperone or something. Yeah, me. By the time I ran upstairs, I had no idea which floor she was on. I'm running around the galleries like a crazy person, and people are staring at me, and I'm yelling, "What are you looking at?" And I'm just cackling the whole time. It was a rush, and I had my clothes on. As she stood completely naked next to a thin Giacometti, the European tourist stared and likely wondered whether or not she was part of an art performance. Maybe something by Marina Abramovich, because that wouldn't have been so out of the ordinary. The American tourists, as usual, weren't so well versed in the sight of public nudity. Now, don't get me wrong, Americans love nudity as much as any culture, maybe even more so, but they generally prefer to be warned about it beforehand. Even today, I must place cautionary signs ahead of controversial exhibitions. So the Americans were the first to complain when their children saw Celia Merode perform. But in reality, she just wasn't caring anymore, as some of the curators here have taken to describing her protest. The visitors' records say that Celia Merode appeared happy as she walked around the Museum of Modern Art completely naked. She seemed to relish in making the teenaged European tourists blush and the teenaged American tourists palpitate in fear. So maybe she did care after all. By the time I got to the 4th floor, I skipped it because I heard somebody yell on the 5th floor. Celia Merode walked into the next gallery where one of my security guards stood in the corner. He saw her and his eyes widened because, like the American tourists, he was not told that she would be there. He told me he was confused by her nudity, though not due to inexperience. He had guarded nudity before. He didn't know how to explain to his family how he had once provided security for an Abramovich performance where 2 naked adults stood facing each other in a doorway so narrow that visitors inevitably brushed against the performer's genitals. Sometimes on purpose, but usually not, because most people don't like to be perverts. The security guard also explained to me that since his shift began after the morning's department-wide meeting, he was afraid that he'd simply missed notice of the day's nudity. So, while he second-guessed himself much longer than I would have preferred, Celia Merode paraded into the next gallery, and again, everybody stopped, looked at her, blushed at the sight of her, but then just blindly assumed she was an artist, and it was completely reasonable for her to be there, wandering aimlessly beside Brancusi's shining bird in space, naked. Some security guard with a blanket ran past me. I turned to follow him, and I just saw Celia's bare ass strutting past a Giacometti. Some people didn't even notice. As word spread that a nude woman, who, mind you, was not Marina Abramovich or Hannah Wilke or Carolee Schneemann, was meandering around the museum, my guards finally descended upon her. They threw a blanket over her, though not exactly a blanket. It was a thick and heavy furniture pad for covering sculptures for transport. Then they escorted her past the sleeping gypsy and starry night. They threw this blanket over her like they were trapping a parakeet, and I just start yelling, "Celia! Celia!" But they hurried her off to who knows where. I saw her clothes scattered across the floor, so I scooped them all up. In between several frantic calls crackling over my walkie-talkie, I ran out of my office to meet them at the elevator. The white doors slid open, and the 2 guards promptly pulled her out by the arms and led her back to my office. They sat her down in a chair facing me across my desk. She stared at me, naked but for the blanket, and she often was looking up where behind my head was a poster of Jean-Michel Basquiat's Prophet One over my right shoulder. And there was a poster of Cindy Sherman's untitled film still, number 2, over my left shoulder. They were tacked to my wall. Now, I stared directly at Celia Merode's brown eyes, which gaped out from the furniture pad that shrouded her head and body like she was a hooded monk. And I think she was holding her breath. And I know I was holding mine. I did not know who would speak first.